Welcome to WhiskyCast, cask strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie. This is episode number 966 for August 21st, 2022. Coming up in a few minutes.
You know, a lot of athletes, actors, musicians, whoever, they start companies and then it becomes secondary to them. So they have their prime commodity, which is their whatever they're doing, whether it's acting or music or whatever. And then it's like, oh, and I also have a brand. And the thing with me and Ian is that we actually take Brothers Bond and we make it part of us and part of our sort of like what we do. And I think that is the big distinction.
Ian Somerhalder and Paul Wesley are better known for their acting careers on shows like The Vampire Diaries and the new season of Star Trek Strange New Worlds, in which Paul Wesley takes on the iconic role of James T. Kirk. But their whiskey careers are taking off too. Last year they released the first batches of Brothers Bond Bourbon. It's become one of the fastest growing new bourbon brands on the market. They just released a cask strength version last month. And we'll have a cask-strength conversation with them on this week's WhiskyCast In-Depth. That's just ahead, along with the What I'm Tasting This Week department, your voice, behind the label, and...
That was fascinating to hear just the history and, I know him from so-and-so and everything. I really geeked out on it.
The news is next on this week's WhiskyCast.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
You know, people always ask me, does Redbreast go better with ice or without? Would it go well with figs, dark chocolate, apple crumble? Is there one particular thing I should enjoy it with? I tell them, yeah, other people.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast.
Gabriel Cardarella here with Dewar's Whiskey, inviting you to enjoy this episode of WhiskyCast with a glass of Dewar's, the most awarded blended Scotch whiskey in history.
Let's get started with the news. It's brought to you by the Dalmore. Lots of news out of Kentucky this week, starting with the announcement of this year's class of inductees for the Kentucky Bourbon Hall of Fame. Julian Van Winkle III joins his legendary grandfather, Pappy Van Winkle, in the hall, along with Andrea Wilson of Michter's, Rabbit Hole founder Kava Zamanian, retiring Kentucky Congressman John Yarmouth, and retiring Kentucky State Representative Chad McCoy. The late Stephen Thompson rounds out the list. The founder of Kentucky Artisan Distillery, who died last year, was named the winner of this year's Parker Beam Lifetime Achievement Award. It's the first Hall of Fame class since 2019 because of the pandemic, and Kentucky Distillers Association President Eric Gregory says that gave the association's board a chance to take a new look at the way inductees are selected.
We decided, let's take that kind of judge and jury away from the board, let them nominate, and then let's bring in the folks who are really the industry legends and know everybody to help assist in this selection. And I've got to tell you, getting those gentlemen in the room and lady, Dixie Hibbs was also on that committee, was something in itself, just to hear them talk and reminisce and everything. But once they started looking at all the nominees to the Hall of Fame, they went in depth and talked about the person, the personalities, and, what it means to be in the Hall of Fame, what an honor it is and things. And it was a 3 or 4 hour meeting. And afterwards, I was talking to Chris Morris, who was one of the selection committee members. And I said, man, that was fascinating to hear just the history and, I know him from so-and-so and everything. I really geeked out on it. So the process worked great, and looking forward to continuing that in the future.
The induction ceremony is set for September 13th in Bardstown, Kentucky. By the time you hear this, the Kentucky Bourbon Benefit Auction to raise money for flood victims will likely be over. It ends on Sunday night, but the auction has already reached its goal of raising $1 million in bids. All of the proceeds are going to the state's official Eastern Kentucky Disaster Relief Fund. There are still more ways to help, though. Buffalo Trace Distillery kicked off its own online auction of rare whiskeys and experiences on Thursday. There are 6 lots to bid on, including a complete set of Pappy Van Winkle whiskeys and a Blanton's VIP tour of Buffalo Trace. Bidding runs through this Thursday. We have a link for details in the show notes for this episode at WhiskyCast.com. In addition, Four Roses Distillery plans to put a special limited edition bottling on sale at the distillery next Monday. Master distiller Brent Elliott says it's a 16-year-old batch that was being held for a special occasion, and the chance to help people in need made that a logical choice.
So Monday we're going to open up from 9 to 4, and it's going to be multiple barrels, so it's not just going to be 100 or 200 bottles. We're going to have we're bottling it actually today and tomorrow, so I don't know what the final count's going to be, but it's hopefully going to be a sufficient amount to raise a lot of money. It's going to be, I think the bottles are $200 a piece, and 100% of the proceeds are going to go to flood victims. And again, it's one of these batches that's been set aside for limited editions. It's just fantastic.
Once again, the Four Roses Flooding Relief Bottle will go on sale starting next Monday at the distillery for $200 a bottle, with all proceeds going to flood relief efforts. Meanwhile, Brown-Forman is out with this year's editions of its King of Kentucky bourbon, and I meant editions plural, because there are two versions, a 15-year-old distilled in 2006 that will be primarily available in Kentucky with limited amounts in Illinois and Ohio, and a very limited 18-year-old Kentucky-only version. The 15-year-old will carry a recommended retail price of $249.99 a bottle. The 18-year-old is priced at $349.99. I'll have my tasting notes for the 15-year-old later on. In Scotch news, Ardbeg is out with the fourth annual release of its 19-year-old Trayvon single malt. This year's version has a higher percentage of Oloroso sherry casks in the blend than the previous editions. It'll be available starting September 1st with a recommended price of $299.99 a bottle. Finally, Ireland's Slieve League Distillery will be releasing its latest single malt on September 1st as well. The legendary Midnight Silky is a triple distilled peated whiskey. No word yet on pricing. You can keep up on the latest whiskey news all week long at WhiskyCast.com and on our social media timelines. The news is brought to you by the Dalmore.
Hello, Richard Patterson here, Master Distiller, Master Blender for the Dalmore. Whenever the team and I are in the world sharing our exceptional single malt, we like to keep in touch with Mark Gillespie and the latest news from WhiskyCast.
Time now for the WhiskyCast calendar of events brought to you by Catoctin Creek Distilling. Got word this week that the Great American Whiskey Fair returns for its 10th year on October 7th in Columbia, South Carolina. Tickets are still available for malt stock this year. It'll be the weekend of September 23rd through the 25th in Lieveld, the Netherlands. Whiskey Live Paris is that same weekend, the 24th through the 26th, followed by the Whiskey Show in London from September 30th through October 2nd. Between now and then, the Twisted Tale in Philadelphia is bringing back its annual Whiskey Bonanza on September 15th. Bourbon and Beyond is the weekend of September 15th through the 18th in Louisville, Kentucky. And Whiskey Live Toronto is September 17th and 18th. If you're responsible for organizing a whiskey event, no matter how large or how small, let us know about it, and we'll add it to the searchable calendar at WhiskyCast.com. It's brought to you by Catoctin Creek Distilling, makers of the Virginia Rye Whiskey. You'll find their Roundstone Rye at fine whiskey shops in 26 U.S. states, 3 continents, and online. Visit the new BuyVirginiaRye.com site for more details, and please drink responsibly.
Dewar's master blender Stephanie McLeod's innate curiosity, combined with her passion for whiskey maturation, cask finishing, and blending, has created some truly incredible expressions for Dewar's Scotch whiskey. It's also earned her 4 consecutive Master Blender of the Year titles at the International Whiskey Competition, making her the first person to achieve such an accolade. Her innovative spirit is the inspiration behind the ultra-premium Dewar's Double 32 Year, the highest-rated blended Scotch whiskey in the world with a score of 94.4. So whether you consider yourself a whiskey connoisseur or just want to find an exciting new whiskey experience, consider one of Stephanie's other masterful expressions, including Dewar's 15-year, Double 21-year, or Dewar's 8-year Mizunara cask finish, and discover just how rewarding curiosity can be. Enjoy responsibly.
WhiskyCast In-Depth is brought to you by Mortlock and the Classic Malts lineup. For a show that appealed to a young adult demographic, they sure drank a lot of bourbon on the Vampire Diaries. In fact, when the vampires Paul Wesley and Ian Somerhalder played weren't in search of blood, they were usually drinking bourbon. That's where the two actors discovered their own love of bourbon, and after the show ended a few years ago, they decided to start their own bourbon brand, Brothers Bond. While Paul Wesley has been busy acting as well, most recently as James T. Kirk in the latest Star Trek saga, Strange New Worlds, Ian has been focusing on Brothers Bond for the last 3 years during COVID and does most of the blending work himself. I first talked with them on a Zoom call with other whiskey writers last December and caught up with them on another Zoom call this week. I know it would be easy to start off just asking where did the idea for Brothers Bond come from, but I want you guys to start off by telling me how you discovered bourbon in the first place years ago.
Paulie? Boy, yeah. I mean, for me, the bourbon, the spirit was introduced to me in Atlanta, Georgia, in the South. So I guess that's appropriate. We were filming the show, Vampire Diaries, and the characters drank bourbon on the show, and I started drinking bourbon off screen as well. Really just sort of became, I can't, I'm Polish. I hate vodka, which is crazy because I'm supposed to love vodka, right? That's like, Poland is known for its vodka. All of my relatives drink vodka. I can't drink it. I think maybe because when I was a kid, I drank a ton of vodka and at a high school party, and that's it. That kind of becomes your, now it's like a Pavlovian response. Every time I smell vodka, I just like curl up into a corner. But for me, bourbon, I discovered as an adult, and I really enjoyed it and appreciated it for what it was. And, we've told the story a million times, but Ian and I drank bourbon on screen, and then we drank bourbon off screen, hence the name Brothers Bond. And that's it. But
were you drinking real bourbon on screen?
By the way, Ian just dropped off. I don't know. God bless him. He's got those blue eyes, as I said to you earlier. That's his saving grace. Technology is not. But no, was I drinking bourbon on screen? Look, I probably shouldn't say this for legal purposes, but there were far too many times where it was supposed to be either water with food coloring or iced tea, and I was indeed drinking bourbon on screen.
I ask that only because with multiple takes, it would have been easy to overdo it after a few takes.
Yeah. Well, it explains my my performance, I suppose, in the latter years of the show. I'm half kidding.
I don't want to joke about Vampire Diaries, but my daughter told me today that she binge watched the entire series during COVID just because she needed something to do.
Yeah.
And she just said, okay, there's multiple seasons of this. I can binge watch the whole thing.
Yeah. Well, good for her. I never got through it. Working on the show 5 days a week for 9.5 months, I never actually, thought to myself, well, during my spare time, I'll watch it. And I think maybe now enough time has passed where I can watch the whole thing, because I actually have never really seen it from beginning to end. And I'll tell you, so many people have discovered or rediscovered this show as a result of Netflix, which unfortunately we're now actually going to be taken off of Netflix in the next month. We've been on there for, God knows what, 15 years or something since the show premiered, and or whatever. I don't know how long it's been, 13. And it's crazy how many people are new fans of the show, even though the show came out, so many years ago. Because again, during COVID, just like your daughter, nobody had anything to do. So they were, watching Netflix. What else are you going to do? You can't leave the house. And drinking bourbon. So it's like it was a perfect storm.
Tell me about the genesis of the brand, and how did you guys decide to come up with a bourbon brand of your own in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, during the series, you're at this I was away from my friends and my family, everyone, right? And suddenly you're in Atlanta, Georgia, you're working nonstop. And so the people that you're working with become your family. And Ian and I became extremely close, obviously. And, we had been talking about doing a bourbon, from day one. We were like, oh man, how cool would it be for us to have our own bourbon brand? But, we didn't really know how to go about doing it. And frankly, we were so busy filming that it would have been impossible. Once the show ended and then, COVID hit, and suddenly the idea that we had been talking about for so many years became much more viable in terms of, actually doing it and succeeding. And so we put this company together after years of thinking about it. We put this company together, somewhat quickly in terms of from the idea of saying, okay, let's do it, to then, getting our first retailer, to buying the juice and blending it. And, it all happened, relatively quickly, I suppose. But Ian, jump on and interject at any point.
Yeah, Ian, tell us about the genesis, and then we'll get back to your bourbon origin story in a second.
Yeah, no, sorry about that. I just realized one thing, that my daughter's found a nook in my office where she's obsessed with this new movie, the Sea Beast movie, and she has made a fort, unbeknownst to me, where all of my plug goes in. So she unplugged my plug that plugs all my devices. 2 iPhones and my iPad have basically been off all day. So that's why I had a little bit of a malfunction as far as power. Yeah, like Paul mentioned, this has been it was 10 years in the making 2 years ago when we were putting together the marketing strategy. So it's 12 years in the making now, but I guess it's technically made. So it's not 10 years in the making anymore. Like Paul said, there was no way, shape, or form that we could have gone through and done this while we were shooting the show. Also, too, the way that the cards sort of folded, having talked about this for a long time, and Vincent Hanna and I, having been business partners before, having someone in that alcohol, wine and spirit space is a very specific business. One that if you don't know about, you don't know about. And having someone who could bring this to life around Paul and I and build a team that is able to execute at such a high level takes a lot of time, energy, and focus. And COVID, as awful as it was, it did a number of things other than, up in the entire world, but it gave us the time, it switched. Had we done this 4 years ago, the amount of every executive from every major retailer or our distribution partners, we would have had to have been in front of them presenting this, sitting in an office in Dallas or Chicago or New York or Bentonville, Arkansas. And it would have been exhausting, and it would have been so costly that it would have, that's what most companies start cost-wise. That small little outlier moment, like if you were sort of looking at the Malcolm Gladwell approach, right? That one blip in our history, that one mishap, that bump in the road, allowed us to have an ability to reach and communicate with every major distribution partner and every major retail partner in the entire entire country. That has never happened before, where I guess a mode of doing business changed within 1 6-month period. Within 6 months into COVID, every executive known to humankind, every executive in any business knew, okay, I got to get on a Zoom, whether it was banking, alcohol and spirits, airlines, real estate, retail, whatever it may be. That was the lucky strike of the match for us. and hence now we're talking to you. What, Paul, we launched in May 1 of last year. We're 1 year and 4 months or whatever into market. And I think we're in 13,000+ points of distribution, retail distribution. That is a really great lucky break.
And that's unheard of for a new brand.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
When did you learn to appreciate bourbon?
Mine's pretty controversial because people get so up in arms. But you got to remember, this was the early 80s. My understanding of bourbon comes from, being 4 years old, being a tiny child and being in Southeast Louisiana. We'd spoken briefly about this before, but, in Louisiana in the 70s and even still into the 80s, a lot of the property lines were made of sugarcane just because of the old world. And it was a lot cheaper than a fence. It grows rapidly. You can cut it down if you want to. And hey, good fences make for good neighbors. So we would cut as little kids. Even at 5, my dad would give me a cane knife because I'd been learning how to use one, watching my brother and my uncles and everyone since I was a tiny baby. Give us a cane knife and say, hey, all right, after, it was after church on Sundays. Go cut down, 4 or 5 stalks of the sugar cane, bring it back. So me and my cousins go and cut it down and then walk it back, and those leaves, after they rub on you in the heat, will give you a rash. And then we would grind out all that fresh sugarcane juice. And my aunts and my parents would make mint juleps. You go next to the oak tree, pull out, you're talking about 20 feet of mint that grows like weeds. You take all the mint, pull them all off. Parents would drink mint juleps. The kids, we would be muddling sugarcane and mint. And those are those early, those really early memories of mint and sugarcane. And as a kid, you're drinking that sugarcane and mint high as a kite because there's just so much sugar. But that was like familial history, right? So that's a very sort of like granular familial tie for me and bourbon. It's pretty special, man. And by the way, in Louisiana too, like most kids, they go to parties and they're drinking cheap beer and stuff. And I spent a lot of time, LSU and other universities around Louisiana, but in Louisiana, those parties were all about great bourbons, high-end beers and cocktails, and they knew what they were serving. It was always just bourbon. It's always bourbon. Hey, if it's hot, put it on ice. If it's cold, leave it. Put it in something warm. But it was always just bourbon.
You credit the team, but I want to give you guys the credit as well because you actually do the blending yourselves. You could have farmed that out and hired a consultant to put it together for you, but you guys do the blending and the hard part yourselves. And I'm curious how you started that process and learned how to blend whiskey.
Fortunately, it comes with passion and drive, right? You've got to know what, it's funny. Paul and I talk about this all the time, not to sound too cerebral about it, but I don't know if a painter knows exactly what the painting is going to look like when they're sitting there staring at a blank canvas, but they know they have a drive and a passion, something in their head or their heart they got to get out, right? And that paint is going to be that medium, and that canvas is going to allow them to tell that story. Paul and I have actually almost the same palate when it comes to bourbon, and we didn't know this, but actually we have really great trained palates. And so we were fortunate enough to work with a master blender who unfortunately has to go unnamed, but he just gave us, it was more about the nuts and bolts of understanding what flavor profiles you get from what elements. And then also too, knowing what to look for as a blender, right? Not as a consumer. you get that in certain elements of like the wine industry, right? You have wine snobs or beer snobs. And Paul and I always have the same thought, which is you should not have to be an expert to taste something amazing. Something either tastes great or it doesn't. You may not like a certain element, but you say, wow, this is one well-balanced spirit, man. From when you know something, sometimes you get a great nose, you have an amazing bouquet, whatever it may be, but that mouth experience doesn't necessarily follow that nose experience, or vice versa. You get something that smells super flat on the nose, but that mouth experience, wow, it's incredible. We wanted both of them to be exceptional, a really great experience on both of them. And so that was important to us. And we wanted something everyone could drink. But we needed two things: immediate approachability. Literally, we can drink this one right out of the bottle, but where anyone could literally pick up our flagship, pour it out of a bottle, drink it, just drink it straight. That's how balanced and smooth it is. I wouldn't say smooth. Let's call it balanced and complex.
Paul?
And then and another thing that was complex enough for people like Mark Gillespie to say, hey, listen, I'm not an 80 proof guy, but I will tell you, this is very well blended bourbon. I cannot wait to taste the cask strength, the 100 proof, the 90 proof, and any other higher proof line extensions you guys have up your sleeves. That for us is a win, because this is the only thing we want to drink. Right? What did I miss, Paul?
Mark, you were going to say something.
I was going to give you a chance to say something.
Yeah. Look, it's true. The one thing that's great about making your own brand is that you can then do whatever you want, right? So you want to create an 80 proof to bring people into the category that don't typically drink bourbon. Okay. Then let's say you want to do a rye, and you want to make your rye a 90 proof. And you want to do a bottled and bond, it's 100. And then you want to do a cask, that's 116, whatever. And so it's really great because you create these multiple SKUs that really, it becomes about personal preference. I can tell you that my father, for example, he loves our 80. He loves the 80 proof. And for him, the cask is, it's good, but it's just a little too strong for him. So it's kind of like just everybody has their own preference. I'm a higher proof kind of guy. But I also understand there's a time and a place for everything. Sometimes you just want to pour a little bourbon and not think about it, and just literally have a sipping bourbon, which is what people really, you kind of just enjoy, whatever's in front of you, and you're not sitting there, really tasting the palate and trying to like really understand. You just want to kind of have a drink and relax. That's sometimes, you want to pull out the 80 proof. And then with the cask, it's more of an experience. So I went to a dinner party the other day, and I brought the cask, and it brought
the whole cask, 53 gallons?
Exactly. It became a conversation. It became like a real conversation piece. We spent like 45 minutes talking about the various notes, and, it was just like a really wonderful conversation. So I think it's just time and place and personal preference.
You just brought this up, Mark. Paul brought this up. Damn. I really love drinking our cask drink.
I know. I'm in talking about it now. I'm like, I got to have a sip. It's 12:24 p.m., so technically it's the afternoon.
Dude,
And I should point out, I've got a bit of the cask strength as well in my glass.
There you go. Thanks, man.
It's delicious. It's so delicious.
Paul was just mentioning our rye. This is our rye at 95 proof. And I haven't opened it up and smelled it in about a week. I obsessively, we just smell it, taste it, just, always just seeing how it's just what it's doing at every given touch point. And I'll even Sharpie just like, just sort of graduated, lines to see where it is, see what oxygen is doing to it. And Paul's right. It's like, Mark, this better than even better than us. You've been in this game a lot longer. it's like what Paul and I go through in the entertainment world. If you don't have a great script, the film is not going to work, or the television show. You have to have you've got to have the quality and the bones in the story. And the story of these grains expressed in this is giving it that balance that any drinker deserves. And I'm not trying to like sell our people in our company. That just was a thought that just came to me, but it's true that this is what we want to drink. And there's beauty in having your own, because now it's like Vincent Hanna said, and Mark, you and I talked about this before. I think we talked about this in New Orleans. From the very early stages, Vincent Hanna, our CEO, was reminding us, he said, look, anything that comes off of this flagship bourbon, this one's signed, sorry.
You sign your own bottles, buddy?
I can only drink them if I sign them.
Ian signs his own bottles and puts them on his nightstand.
Yeah. This is my
next to a headshot of himself.
I sleep here at this desk. No, but it has to have the same DNA. And Vincent reminded us, he goes, guys, what does a family have the same of? Same DNA. So that's, this cask strength is literally the unfiltered, untouched version of this. I mean, other than, we use that big, you've seen those, and I always like to show people, I don't have one here with me, but that the charcoal filter, not charcoal filter, just this filter to get all those big chunks of our cask out. That's it. I mean, how beautiful is that, And then really looking at, one of the biggest challenges is one of the things that Paul and I didn't realize was like inventory management. The big companies, whether it's, Diageo or Pernod or Grupo Campari or any of these big companies, they have people that do their inventory management. It's not just that we're a small company, but I go back and forth to Lawrenceburg, Indiana, checking on, it's almost like, I swear, it's like, it's just this weird parental feeling. It's almost like checking on your kids in school or, checking on them like at boarding school. I know it sounds weird, but looking at these barrels, a 1-year barrel versus a 2-year barrel versus a 3-year barrel. And because we blend 3 different mash bills, certain mash bills do better lower in the rick house for the first 2 years or so. And then we can move them up to higher parts of the rick houses, to get that heat and humidity and really start bringing out all those flavors. But it's so interesting, a lot of trial and error and a lot of capital, as you can imagine, Mark, because this is, the bourbon game is a highly capital intensive business. That's why it's not like making, a vodka or gin or something. Respectfully, those are amazing spirits, but you can make them very quickly, very inexpensively. This stuff costs a effing fortune. And so there's a lot of quality control in there, learning and understanding how and what they're reacting to in those beautiful, Lawrenceburg, Indiana seasons. And it's been one hell of a journey. And that was this, which was, I think, we picked out 70 barrels. Yeah, it was 70 of these barrels. But you're picking out 70 barrels amongst hundreds and hundreds, which is great. And I'm glad we did it. I'm glad we started doing it, out 24 months out to really understand, because, we knew trajectory wise when we want to be able to release our cask strength, following up, especially an 80 proof bourbon. The one thing you immediately do is give the consumer, that high proof immediately to feel that what is the true nature of that 80 proof bourbon that is ultimately the fastest growing ultra premium bourbon in the country. Let's give them to the purists and the people who really want that extra ABV. Let's give it to them.
I was talking to a friend of mine who owns a very successful company, not spirits, but he owns a successful clothing company. And he messaged me the other day and he said, because he's really fascinated by by Brothers Bond, and he said to me that he thinks that the reason that Brothers Bond is successful is because, a lot of athletes, actors, musicians, whoever, they start companies, and then it becomes secondary to them. So they have their prime commodity, which is their whatever they're doing, whether it's acting or music or whatever. And then it's like, oh, and I also have a brand. And the thing with me and Ian is that we actually take Brothers Bond and we make it part of us and part of our sort of like what we do. And I think that is the big distinction with a lot of these, celebrity driven brands, is that it becomes less about the DNA of the individual and it becomes a separate thing. And I think for us, we always envision this as being a part of our DNA. And so, it's really becomes associated with us. And I think there's certain people that have done that successfully. And I think that is really what separates the successful brands from the less successful brands.
When we first talked last December, you guys were trying to get the cask strength into the market. It's just now getting there. What did you guys have to learn about supply chain issues that you didn't know before about how to get stuff into market that delayed this release?
Supply chain issues suck.
Yeah, I mean, they've now, like, I think because of the COVID situation, on one hand, it was like, okay, cool, people are sitting home and they're, there's less on premise, but there's more, hey, let's buy this online. Let's try this. Let's go to retail. Let's try this. Let's have this delivered. So it was a lot of like people experimenting, trying new things. You had people's attention. They were less distracted. So that was a positive. The negative is that there was, glass shortage. There's, cork shortage.
Cork issues.
Yeah, I mean, you name it. And then obviously you don't have the shipping is a problem, right? Because you have less workers. There's less people working. There's a bazillion things that we may not have had.
Well, also too, Paul, don't forget the single biggest one.
Bourbon.
Yeah, right. Which is that, we bottle this in Fort Smith, Arkansas, which everybody knows is Pernod, who we love. But all of these big companies, Diageo, Pernod, Campari, AB InBev, their businesses exploded into the 30% rate higher. So these massive bottling facilities are just cranking millions of cases a month. All of a sudden, we have a brand that's growing by leaps and bounds. It's the biggest release of any bourbon ever. But all of a sudden, oh, hey, guys, you're bottling. You're delayed 6 weeks. Sorry, bottling line's not open. Wait, what do you mean? Our entire next release in our business is predicated on this release date. We love you. Can't help you. Oh, hey, by the way, bottling was delayed another 3 weeks. We really apologize. And there is nothing, zero you can do about it. And that was the blessing and the curse of it all, having the business side exploding on the off-premise, which is great for retail, but then not having the ability to bottle, not having the ability to get certain dry supplies. I mean, it's real. For people like in, say, the tech world, I don't envy them. People starting new companies that didn't have the type of supply chain teams that we have. Oh man, it's how companies just fall apart,
Paul?
Yeah, I mean, exactly what Ian said. And I think, the goal down the line is to start our own distillery, to start our own, to have our own facilities and to have, to be able to control everything. And unfortunately, when you're a new company, you just don't have that. You can't do that. You just don't, we don't have the big backers. We don't have, we're not backed by the big dogs. We're an independent brand. We have a small team, and we got to make use with what we have. And that's what we're doing now. And we're just like, we're hustling. We are just hustling. I mean, we are a tiny, tiny team, given the fact that we're in 40-something states or something. So that's that.
Yeah, you know, honestly, Mark, and again, I throw it back to you. You know this even better than we do. Having a brand home is huge. Having a brand home, you know, a place for you to bring people.
Wouldn't that be great?
Yeah, it is. And by the way, you know, we've been hot on the trail.
Why don't we just do it at your house, dude?
Yeah, we could actually. It's a little hot and a little dry in California.
It's hot and dry in Indiana and Kentucky.
No, it's hot and wet.
Or I guess you're right. There's a ton of humidity.
Hot and humid.
Although right now, yeah, I guess you're right. Okay, fair enough.
But it's but you know, we as a team, you know, we're looking for that brand home, and we're looking for it a lot. But one of the things that we also came up and had a real sort of a really good feeling about is, think about this. It used to be, and again, you know this better than we do. It used to be, well, listen, this is craft, but it's scale, right? This is a large, you know, it's craft, it's small batches, but it's at larger volumes. Distilleries are unbelievably capital intensive. You want to talk about cash. That is major, major capital. The one thing, you know, it used to be that small brands try to be craft and never talk about where they come from. Our partners at MGP are like family. I mean, these are the people who, I mean, I'm on the phone with Sam Schmelzer literally every day of my life. And this is a young guy, a young master blender. You know what I mean? He just happens to know bourbon so well. And he's been given a tremendous amount of responsibility there, and justly so, because he's that good. But the great thing is for us, we've got one of the largest distilleries in the world, arguably one of the most famous, the old Seagram's distillery, you know, in Whiskey City, right on the river in Lawrenceburg, Indiana, where some of the greatest whiskeys in the world are made. And we are a small company, so we had to fight tooth and nail, not only just to get our blend and make sure that we get our bourbon laying down and get it in the right part of the rick houses. We have a team there that treats us like family. So when we talk about a brand home, the great thing is we can find a place where we can put our things in our feel, and a little regenerative farm where people can actually come and experience the brand. But we don't have to worry about where this incredible bourbon is going to come from, because we have this team of expert whiskey makers. And when Paul and I get to walk through those rick houses, those old historic rick houses, and see our barrels, you know, that is something that gives us so much pride, but also too some very good legs to stand on, right? We don't have those issues that small companies have, which is supply and, you know, the relationships to actually make this work. Because as you know, this is a very cutthroat business, man. Bourbon is, if you're here and you're welcomed into this, you know, then you're lucky to be able to function at this level. It's the same thing, you know, we've heard since the beginning, but we're fortunate to have that.
So who has the better nose?
The better what?
Who is the better noser of the two of you?
Hey, you know,
who's the better noser?
I mean, look, first of all, what is better? And who's to determine who's right and wrong, right? Because it's all subjective. But I'm going to go ahead and give it to Ian.
We pull out a lot of things. I mean, we all have.
I'm going to give it to Ian. Ian, I think, look, not to shortchange myself, but I do think that Ian does have more of a. I mean, I do think you pick up on subtle subtle notes that I'm not quite picking up on at times. And the original 80, our blend, that this cask strength and our 80 proof really was Ian's creation. Well, we obviously both tried it. We were both there making sure that it was, I remember the day he was showing me like 10 different blends and I was like, this is the one, this is, whatever. We did it together, but really it was Ian was leading the charge. And so I'm going to go ahead and give it to him.
I will tell you this, Paul and I this is the one thing I will say about nosing, where Paul and I had a moment. Now, mind you, these aren't just overnight things, right? If we wanted to change something in the blend, it would take a month or 2 months of consistent. So it was about, I think, 14 months total. But think about that, Mark. That's every day, man. That's a morning, noon, and night thing. And even if you're only doing, say, 2 blends a day, which is not the case, think of the numbers on that, And so Paul and I, we do have the same sort of palates, but one thing we had was a blend that had an amazing bouquet on it. It was more baking spice. It was like spice, right? The other one was like banana. I mean, like fresh cut, smashed banana in your hand. And you could put the two, because Paul and I, when we blend, we actually do it in Cabernet glasses, big goblet Cabernet glasses, because it just gives you all that oxygen and you get both nostrils in, and it's just easier. We broke a lot of them too, especially after a couple bourbons. But you could put these glasses like this, and what you got was not spice or banana. You got banana bread. And I said, come hell or high water, Wesley, we're going to get this shit where it's no longer just spice or banana. It's going to be banana bread. Like, let's make it happen. And 2 months later, lo and behold, when you smell this bouquet, especially on our 80 proof bourbon, you literally smell like fresh cut, like banana bread that grandma made coming out of the oven. And it's pretty unanimous. Anyone who smells that, they go, wow, without telling them anything. Wow, I smell this like banana, like baking. It's like banana bread. Like, exactly. That is the response. So we just were at this, man. We never stopped. And I would call Paul at 2 a.m. or leave him a message like, hey, man, can you be here at 7? He's like, yeah, we got this. So we would taste it at 7 p.m. We tasted at 7 a.m. just to make sure, because you never know what's really there. Hey, we've tasted 12 bourbons, 12 blends today. This last one really tastes great, but maybe it's because there's a huge buildup of rye and corn on our tongues. Like, let's give it that break. And it was that level of just making it happen. Paul literally walked in to my house one day and he goes, dude, you stink. Like, you're like a smelly guy. And you look like Christopher Lloyd in Back to the Future. My hair was all crazy, and I'm wearing like a dirty white T-shirt that looked like a lab coat. But man, those are some amazing experiences we had together just tasting through this. Like, what a journey, man, especially for two guys who'd spent damn near a decade together on television every day. This was a perfect transition.
Paul, I have to ask one cheeky question at the end, since you're now reprising the role of James T. Kirk in the new Star Trek Strange New Worlds show. Have you tried the James T. Kirk bourbon yet that was released a few years ago that Paramount licensed?
What?
There is a James T. Kirk bourbon.
Get out of town.
Nope.
First time I'm hearing about
I kid you
this.
not.
All right, hold on a minute. I'm looking this.
You're not drinking that shit on set, buddy. You're drinking.
Well, first of all, James T. Kirk, my James T. Kirk, drank bourbon on the show. Oh shit! I never looked this up. This is a James T. Kirk 12-year-old bourbon.
Yeah.
Wow. Have you had it, Mark?
Yeah.
How is it?
It ain't cheap.
Nothing to write home about. That's because of the licensing fees to Paramount.
It ain't cheap. Wow, this ain't cheap. This is it's a 94 proof 12-year bourbon that costs $600 for a bottle, and it's sold out. So you can't even get it. So now the only way I can get it is $1,200.
$1,200.
$1,200. Jesus. Well, it's so funny. It's crazy that this is the first time I'm hearing about this.
Hey, Mark.
Bourbon.
Mark, give me your credit card number, buddy. I'm going to order.
Nice try.
Didn't miss a beat. But wow. I mean, this is wild. So I drank bourbon in my first episode, the only episode that's ever aired, that's aired so far. I actually drank bourbon on the show. And I was wondering what the hell bourbon I was drinking. In my head, it was Brothers Bond bourbon. But now I'm thinking it might have been this damn James T. Kirk.
Paul, if you were drinking bourbon, it was your first episode. I'm sure that's going to actually be your best performance, right?
Well, yeah. I wish it had been real bourbon. Unfortunately, it was not. But yeah. Oh wow, man. So anyway, to answer your question, Mark, I have not tried it, but now that I know it exists, maybe I'll spend $1,200. Maybe I'll get Shatner to send me a bottle.
Get Shatner to do it.
You'll find my tasting notes for both the original Brothers Bond bourbon and the cask strength version at the WhiskyCast website. And thanks to Ian Somerhalder and Paul Wesley for joining us on this week's WhiskyCast In-Depth. It's brought to you by Mortlach, whiskey's best-kept secret. Hidden away for decades in some of the world's most famous Scotch whiskies comes a single malt inspired by an original for a fortunate few. Discover the entire Mortlach lineup at malts.com. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Sagamore Spirit. Let's start off with the King of Kentucky 15-year-old bourbon that I mentioned during the news. The strength will vary by barrel, but my sample was bottled at 65.3% ABV. The nose has touches of dark fruits, honey, charred oak, pipe tobacco, and caramel. The taste is thick and robust with good spicy notes of cinnamon, black pepper, and a hint of clove, along with dried fruits and molasses. Adding some water opens up caramel and chocolate notes on the palate, while tempering the spices a bit. The finish is long and spicy with just a hint of oak. I'm scoring the 2022 King of Kentucky bourbon a 93. Let's compare it now with the latest release of Booker's bourbon. Batch 2022-02 is named the Lumberyard batch for the lumberyard where Booker worked with his uncle in between dropping out of the University of Kentucky and getting his first distillery job. This edition is 7 years and a month old, a little less than half the age of the King of Kentucky, and it's bottled at 62.4% ABV. The nose has notes of vanilla beans, charred oak, dark honey, and hints of caramel and dried fruits. The taste has a good balance of wood spices, apples, honey, dried apricots, and vanilla. Adding water to this one opens up touches of dried flowers and cocoa on the palate. The finish is long, spicy, and intense. I'm scoring batch 2022-02 of Booker's The Lumberyard batch a 92. Our tasting notes are brought to you each week by Sagamore Spirit Rye Whiskey, a 100-time award-winning Maryland-style rye. With a determined focus to create the best rye whiskey imaginable, their team of distillers crafts each spirit with a nod to both tradition and innovation. Find their signature, double oak, cask strength, or reserve series of ryes, as well as their line of premium rye whiskey canned cocktails at a retailer near you. Just visit sagamorespirit.com/find-rye to find out more. Please drink responsibly.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
Kentucky and Ireland have plenty in common. Two homes of horse racing. Bluegrass music is said to have Irish roots. Okay, it's not the longest list, but the Redbreast Kentucky Oak Edition only strengthens the bond. Finished in sustainably sourced Kentucky oak for a captivating nose and round taste. I see a triple crown in this thoroughbred's future.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
Let's open up the inbox now for Your Voice, presented by Scarabus Isla Single Malt Scotch Whiskey. Here's a question Mike W. Simpson tweeted after listening to the August 7th episode with Donald McKenzie of Isla's planned Lagan Bay Distillery. Has a coastal whiskey distillery looked at desalination as a way to use ocean or seawater as their source? Cheers. Well, I checked with Adam Hennett at Bruichladdich a few days ago. Figured if anyone would try something like that, it would probably be Bruichladdich. He had not heard of any distilleries trying desalination. Figured the scale desalination plants work on would be out of reach for most distilleries. Meanwhile, at Burb Enthusiasm tweeted this question. I'm particularly curious about the term pure rye as it was used pre-Prohibition. It's my understanding that it was meant to differentiate from rectified ryes that were popular in Maryland at the time, but any further info would be much appreciated. Well, that's exactly what I understand, too. You see, back in the day, rectifiers would use a lot of different methods for stretching their whiskey supply to meet demand, and distillers would use the term pure rye on their bottles as a way to differentiate those whiskeys from the rectified ones. These days, you're not allowed to use the word pure on a whiskey label since it implies that the competition is not, quote, pure. If you have a question, a suggestion, or anything else you'd like to share with whiskey lovers all over the world, you can always find me on social media. Just look for WhiskyCast on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram, or you can just email me. The address is comments@whiskycast.com. Your Voice is presented by Scarabus, the Isla single malt from Hunter Lang & Company that celebrates all of Isla's natural gifts in one bottle. Only those who seek shall find Scarabus. Start your search at hunterlang.com. Let's close out the show now with Behind the Label, our look at the history, science, and people who make whiskey unique. It's brought to you by Writer's Tears. Taking the fifth has been in the headlines lately, and it's not like taking a dram. In fact, taking a fifth goes against all principles of responsible drinking. Okay, I'm being a little tongue-in-cheek here, but let me explain the origin of referring to a bottle of whiskey as a fifth. Back in the old pre-metric days, the standard size of a bottle of whiskey or other distilled spirit in the U.S. was 4/5 of a gallon. So you needed 5 bottles for a gallon since each bottle was 1/5 of a gallon. It's as simple as that, especially when you had a punch recipe that called for a gallon of spirits. Just get 5 bottles of whiskey, rum, or whatever the recipe calls for. As for that other pre-metric term of measurement known as the dram, there never really was a specific amount that made up a single dram. It was often referred to as an amount that was pleasing to both the guest and the host, generous without being too generous. Of course, that is hard to quantify. Today, a standard-sized dram is often measured as 1 ounce of distilled spirits in the U.S., or 35 milliliters in metric terms. If you have something you'd like us to look at on an upcoming episode, just use the contact form at whiskycast.com to get in touch with us. Behind the Label is brought to you by Writer's Tears.
Writer's Tears Copperpot, an 18th century style of premium Irish whiskey, blended from single pot still and single malt. Like yourself, it's one of life's treasured rarities, and what's rare is wonderful. Writer's Tears Copperpot.
That's all for this edition of WhiskyCast. You'll find links to the stories in this episode in our show notes at whiskycast.com. That's also where you'll find the latest whiskey news, my tasting notes, the calendar of events, the whiskey photo of the week, and, of course, a complete archive of all of our past episodes going all the way back to 2005. Get in touch with us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at WhiskyCast. The email address is comments@whiskycast.com.
Well, folks, we're nearing the end of another great episode of WhiskyCast, which means you're probably craving some whiskey. Head on over to Dewar's.com or your local retailer to discover what makes Dewar's the most awarded blended Scotch whiskey in the world.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
Ever go out drinking with a peacock? Always the same. Few too many, tail feathers come out, drinks get knocked over, bartender's not happy, night's over before it started. All I'm saying is, don't be the peacock in your group.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
WhiskyCast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2022, and comes to you from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening.